Just want to welcome everyone to Rivertown Film Online, and thank you all for coming. Tonight's discussion will be on the Jury Prize for Freedom award-winning film, Bill Traylor, Chasing Goats. It is presented thanks to funding provided by the New York State Council of the Arts and the members and supporters of Rivertown Film Society. And we would also like to thank our community partner, Rockland Center for the Arts. My name is Bea Pohl, and I'm a board member of the Rivertown Film, a New York City educator and a playwright. Joining me tonight is the director, Jeffrey Wolf, of the film, Bill Traylor, Chasing Goats, and Nyack Sketchlog artist, Bill Batson. Just some information about our panelists. Jeffrey Wolf has made numerous films about artists, including an award-winning film about James Caffell called Portrait of an Artist. He has also made short films about James Sunford Thomas, Martin Ramirez, Elijah Pierce, and Gregory Van Manen. He has written articles and art reviews for magazines and catalogs, and his photographs have been included in numerous publications. He has worked as an editor for directors such as Arthur Penn, Sidney Lumet, Leslie Headland, John Waters, and Ted Demme. On films such as The Ref, Beautiful Girls, Holes, and Life. Welcome, Mr. Wolf.
Hi, how are you?
My next person on the panel list is Bill Batson, is an artist, writer, and community activist. For 10 years, he has contributed a weekly sketch and short essay titled Nyack Sketchlog to Nyack News and Views, often writing about the people, places, and artists in Rockland County. He also curates programs and exhibits for arts and historical organizations and libraries. Since 2012, he has been the artist in residence at the Nyack Farmers Market and has often introduced films and moderated discussions for Rivertown Film, where he is a member of the advisory board. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you for having me.
Just to keep some housekeeping rules, the chat will be available for questions, as well as unmuting when it's your turn to speak. Please be respectful and mute yourselves when you're not speaking so that everyone can speak and participate in the discussion. Tonight, I'll ask them a few questions and then give you, the audience, an opportunity to ask questions of your own. Mr. Wolf, my question to you. Mr.
Please
Wolf,
call me Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, can you tell us what inspired you to make this film about Bill Traylor, and how did you become aware of this artist?
Well, it actually goes a little further back than Bill Traylor. I met an artist named Elijah Pierce, who was a wood carver in 1970s while I was in college, and he kind of sparked my interest. And one day we had lent some, my wife and I had lent some artwork to the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. for a show called Black Folk Art in America, 1930 to 1980. And when I walked in the gallery, they were just unpacking Bill Traylor's work for the first time. And it just blew me away. And I could never get the images out of my head. And I had my own career beside the filmmaking thing. And so I kind of got locked into that for a few years. And then when I decided to start making films, Bill Traylor was like high on my list of people to delve into. I didn't know that I was going to delve in as deep as I delved in, but it was the story that just wanted to be told. So,
did you find that it was, because I saw the film and I saw how intricate it was and all the information you put into it. Was it easy or difficult? I mean, how long did it take you to create this insightful documentary?
So, you know, if you've been down south at all, the South has kind of taken a bit of a beating. The cities have been, you know, kind of left fallow, and when we first went down to Montgomery, somebody had given us a list of places where Bill Traylor had either lived or worked um, over a period of time. I think we had 6 or 7 locations, and every one of them had been torn down, and there was a parking garage there. And once we were able to kind of dig out the, if you've seen the film, the fountain and the state house and the clock in the center of town, we realized that these were built-in environments that he was using as references in his work. And so as we started to go outside of Montgomery and dig deeper into Montgomery, we could kind of figure out and rebuild that life that he had there. And then when we discovered Rudy Burkhart's 1941 film, shot in color in Montgomery, and got to see how vibrant a city it actually was, it started to fill in a lot of cracks. So to answer your question, it took about 10 years altogether.
Wow.
7 of it was research, and probably 3 years of it was going out and finding the material to back up the concepts.
Wow.
But
it was
the beauty,
really amazing.
The amazing thing for us is that, you know, we're talking about somebody who lived almost 100 years, and through, you know, he was born in 1853. He lived through the Civil War. He lived through Reconstruction. He lived through Jim Crow, World War I, World War II, the Great Migration, the boll weevil, you know, famine. So it's kind of, it's a history book right there, you know.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It was like a storybook to me, the way he was saying, you know, showing all the pictures and everything that was happening. He had some kind of information in his art to show what was going on at that time. So it's really interesting. Bill Batson, another Bill. I have a couple of questions for you. Bill, can you, as an artist, tell us what are your thoughts on Bill Traylor's work?
Well, you know, I'm humbled that I just became aware of his work by this film, and but it serves a very important function for me. I see it as an artist, but I also see it as a kind of a student of American history and the Southern Civil Rights Movement. It's like a prequel to everything that happened in Montgomery, starting in the early 1950s, around the time that Martin Luther King, you know, got into Dexter Baptist Church. And it's amazing. And it also, as I was watching it, I had my artist lens on and my eyes were wide open. Every image was evocative. Every image was fully resolved. The negative space was more interesting than the figures, the color choices. Everything was just so powerful. But then words, like places, started to pop up. So, you know, the whole discussion of Lowndes County and bloody Lowndes, and how incredibly brutal that was as an environment to live in, and to be, you know, to have it recorded. And I showed this to Jeffrey. An image jumped into my mind, and it's not of Bill Traylor's work, but I'll show you an animal here. And it kind of a little bit reminiscent of some of Bill's animal figures. It's from the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, and it's a Black Panther, a political organization that was developed in Lowndes County as a result of how discriminatory life was there, eventually informed the Black Panther Party. And that came out of the soil where, you know, Bill Traylor was a sharecropper. So I just felt like it was an incredible, it was kind of like the illustration of oral histories that there aren't enough of. The oral histories of slaves, the oral histories of sharecroppers. We have fragments of them. A lot of them are lost, like the work of Bill Traylor, and a lot of his work was lost. For me, the hardest moment in the film was when work his family attempted to gather and collect was thrown out by an unthinking landlord. So you know, it's piecing together loss. It's collecting. And I think there was one line actually in Jeffrey's film where it says that when he got into Montgomery and was drawing feverishly, maybe he was trying to reconnect to memories that he had left behind from leaving land that he owned and he farmed. But what I find from his work is that he's helping us connect to memories and important memories for us, I think, to confront, for us to move forward as a society. So I find him an incredibly important artist, in the same way that some of the art critics were talking about in the world of art. But I also think he's an incredibly important artist for us as a country, culturally, in terms of our civics.
So, Bill, I now have a question for you. You have done so much artist drawing works, storytelling works that I think, are storytelling. Do you think, does it mirror what Bill Traylor was doing, or do you think yours is a little bit different, or, as an artist?
Well, it's so very different. And I mean, obviously I just think of it differently seeing it. His work is just such, it's not self-conscious at all. It's not, there's an immediacy, there's an urgency and intensity that I don't find in my own work. But just knowing the story of his life, the way that it's put together, I have more perspective on him. Actually, it's hard to see your own life from inside it, but the fact that he was working a lot, and Jeffrey, correct me if I'm wrong, but he may have been developing his talents through his whole life, but what were his period of most intense productivity? Was it later in his life? Am I correct?
Yeah, I'm gonna help you out here a little bit, Bill.
Thank you.
I mean, one of the big differences is that you're somebody who's doing art all through your life. It's a present thing that you probably have been doing since you were a young boy, and you continue to do it all through. So there's a timeline to what your experiences are with it. With Bill Traylor, I mean, you have to think, you kind of made reference to this a second ago, is that there was some transcendent moment where he takes his ancestry, his history, and puts it all together in these 3 or 4 years, well into his 80s, and puts it all down on paper. So it's a very different kind of experience. It doesn't make it less art or more art. It's just something, it was a story that he had to tell, a narrative. You can't look at these drawings as one drawing. It's a narrative of this entire experience. And you get to do that over a lifetime. If you look closely at the work, you'll see that he builds a lot of things with geometrics, either a triangle or a rectangle, or sometimes a circle. And on the plantation, it's been told that he did do some surveying work, so he may have had some rudimentary skills in that way. But
so that was some drafting. So we had tools, pencil, and paper.
Yeah, he used a stick as a ruler and some pencils. But it's just a very, it's an interesting thing, Bea, when you're talking about creativity and art, how comes out in people in such different kinds of ways. And he would never think of himself as an artist. I mean, Bill, this Bill, is already known as an artist. This is somebody who was doing it out of some, I don't know about need, but he was driven to do it. I mean, something.
Well, I like the way that Greg Tate spoke about it, that there was some kind of conjuring, that there was animal spirits and plant spirits and object spirits. I mean, he was really infusing his life experience into common objects. But
well, let's talk a little bit about conjure. I mean, conjure culture, the reason Greg is in the movie is because conjure culture was very much a part of life in the South. So was magical realism. In some way, everything was kind of built into a kind of a magical thinking. And so what conjure culture means is like hoodoo, or some of the stuff that came up through Haiti and through South America, and those ideas kind of permeated into the culture. So like if you listen to African folk tales, birds have certain meanings. Some people may have thought that Bill Traylor was a conjurer himself. There was one woman who wrote about him that those bottles of liquor were elixirs. I don't buy into that personally, but but there is, there, but the culture definitely exists. And I think, and that's what Greg was so good at talking about. And if you notice, Greg doesn't try to interpret them. He's just just wants the viewer to understand that there may be more to it than meets the eye.
Well, thank you both, Bill and Jeffrey. I'm going to open it up to the rest of the audience so they can get their questions in. Do anybody have any questions they want to ask Bill or Jeffrey? Vera looks like she's ready to
jump in.
The fun. There were so many stories in the film, Jeffrey, about that he did a massive number of drawings, and then various times they were destroyed or lost. How many do you think he ever produced? Do you have any idea? And how many exist now that are known?
The low ball number is 1,000. The high ball number is probably 1,500.
That exist, or that he ever did?
That he ever did.
Uh-huh.
I'm just grabbing a plug so that I run out of battery on my earphones. But go ahead. Yeah, I would say I can't answer how many could have been. I think we can only talk about how many probably still exist in some form or other. But no more than 1,500 would be my guess.
And how many do still exist approximately? I don't.
We've documented somewhere around 1,200 maybe that we've seen, literally seen. So everybody figures that there's more that maybe could be out there in some form or other. But you have to understand that his work, it's been pretty much documented. So it's very hard to find something outside the possibility of either Shannon or somebody else close by had necessarily seen it at some point. So it's really important if you ever buy one that that the documentation for it is very strong. Because like everything else, there's fakes out there that to an untrained eye can easily pass by.
But
I was sorry.
Okay.
I was fascinated by the objects that he drew on the back of. It reminded me a little bit of Keith Haring, because Keith Haring's pieces were all on subway posters, and when the ones that were removed, they were kind of there was a timestamp by what was on the other side, and I was very interested. I almost wanted to see the opposite side of every drawing. Once they showed the drawing, I was always wondering what's on the opposite side.
Yeah, speaking of Keith Haring, I'm guilty of not having watched the whole film. I started it and then I lost track of the link and I just got it back. So, and you may have touched on this. So I was kind of familiar with his work a little bit in the past, but then I was listening to a podcast, and maybe you had talked to this guy, Richard Polsky.
I know, yeah. I heard that podcast recently. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, because he's in and he authenticates Keith Haring and
Andy Warhol and a few other people he's involved with. Yes.
So I was kind of impressed that he was in the company of these guys as far as the authentication.
Well, I can tell you a little bit. It's not that important, but over the last year, some fakes have been showing up, and there's about 8 or 9 of us who are capable of easily determining what whether they are or aren't, based on how many we've seen and what just understanding what the brush strokes look like. And but all this felt, myself as a filmmaker, I didn't want to be somebody who was taking that responsibility, and many dealers didn't want to do that either. So somebody knew Richard Polsky's business, and he had sold Bill Traylor's like back in the 70s or 80s, and so he seemed like a good person to be involved with. But I'll tell you something interesting is that I'm just waiting for the helicopter to go by. About a week or two ago, a big museum on the East Coast announced in an art magazine that they had acquired 9 pieces, and they were all fake. And the magazine that announced it, was brought to a lot of our attentions, and through some phone calls and authenticity studies, we were able to tell the museum that they weren't real Bill Traylors. So yes, specifically, I think that if you can remember the name of that website, it was kind of an interesting interview about collecting art. Like it's a guy who has a website, a podcast.
The podcast is Art Tactic.
Art Tactic, right?
It's a good podcast.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. The authentication is really a taboo thing for art historians these days. They don't want to go near it. But he seems to know, and he seems to, seek out advice from other experts. So he doesn't do it in a vacuum, or
without a doubt.
Research.
No, I mean, I would say we are his. I am one of his experts.
That's good.
that he comes to. But I want to come back to you 1 second. So I wanted to say something to Bill that I thought was interesting about what you just said, is that a lot of artists who talk about facing an empty canvas, when Bill Traylor uses found cardboard and found materials, he's already got like some place to start. And a lot of artists talk about, like Terry Winters once said to me, all art starts in the middle, meaning that you have to like even Pollock, he said, would draw a figurative drawing on top of his canvas before dripping on top of it, just to have like some sort of a place to start. How do you feel about that? Like facing an empty piece of paper or drawing space?
I mean, my work is very different. It's very driven by my reference. So I'm really more of an illustrator. Often I think of myself than a fine artist, and I'm driven by the idea of an essay, and the essay requires an image. So I select an image. I often take the photograph myself. So it really is kind of the world around from where he sat, like the fountain. So if I was drawing about Montgomery, I wouldn't draw. I mean, now I'd like to draw Bill Traylor, but I'd draw the fountain, or I'd draw the clock, or I'd draw the State House. So it's a very, very different starting point. But if I could ask Carol a question, because I know how well she understands and how she's familiar with the art world right now. What are some of the artists, Carol, that you see Bill Traylor's reference or influence? Because immediately I was wondering, like Kara Walker or Basquiat. I mean, it felt pretty strong.
Exactly, those street artists,
I don't know if it's because of
What's that?
I don't know if I mean the street artists, but I'm wondering if they actually had access to his work and saw it, because I felt a very strong kind of connection.
Well, yeah, Jeffrey would know that. Would they have?
I would say, I don't know if they saw it, but I would compare him more to a Basquiat than a Kara Walker. Right. I mean, I think just because of the silhouettes, it makes you think of Bill Traylor, but I think where Kara Walker is coming from is a very different place. It's based in, like the tradition of European painting. And I mean, she's an amazing artist, but I think it's not motivated by this. I think it's a reaction to contemporary art rather than the other way around. But when you think about like William Johnson, though, and Jacob Lawrence, the artists who were skilled artists who were asked to change the way they painted to have it be more,
folk,
to have more Southern kind of vibe to it. So it's, you never want to be in a situation where you're completely being driven by some other force than what's coming up from your own heart or head, I guess.
Yeah, but whatever. If they had seen him, it's possible Kara Walker had seen him, and things filter in, So,
of course.
Yeah.
Well, in our movie, you'll see when you see some of the narrators, I actually used actors to do a lot of different things, and one of them was to be like a silhouette of the drawings. You know, like that you would see them in shadow and in a way that kind of mimicked what Traylor was doing too. So what you're saying is true. You kind of adapt to, you know, different ways of telling your story.
I have
I
a
wanted to
question
know
for
where-
Jeffrey.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was
No.
just wondering if you know if his work's on view anywhere in New York.
There's no, I do not believe there is a gallery that's just showing him, but there are a few galleries that show his work. Rico Maresca, Kevin Morris, Betty Cunningham. Betty Cunningham has a pretty large, if you were to go in and say, can I see your Bill Traylors? Herschel and Adler, you know, pretty big galleries. And I highly recommend Leslie's book from the Smithsonian, Leslie Umberger's book called Between Worlds, The Art of Bill Traylor, is the catalog that goes along with the Smithsonian show, the Smithsonian retrospective that happened in 2018.
Yeah, I saw it. It's on a website, and I can send that link to everyone if they just want to go and take a look at that. Barry, you said you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, Jeffrey.
Hi, Barry.
Hello, thank you. I really enjoyed the film.
Thank you.
Here's the question. Was he in Montgomery at the time that Martin Luther King was beginning his work there, or that Rosa Macaulay Parks did her action? And was
Yeah,
there
I
any
think
interaction that, I mean, did they have any interaction?
not that anyone knows of, and pretty much between 1946 and 1949, he was on his daughter's land and pretty old. I mean, he was in his well into his 90s. So I interesting though, I don't really go into this that much in the movie because I don't have that much information about it, but in his 90s he converted to Catholicism, and the church that I actually show, you know, when the film says that he was still, they thought he died and he's still alive, that's actually a black church, that a black Catholic church that that he ended up being confirmed in, and was buried in that church, is the one who carted them to the cemetery to be buried. But I would say the connection that I make in the film between him and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and the whole movement, the bus boycott, that's more of a theoretical connection than it is a factual one.
Yeah, thank you.
Meaning that you know, we were talking about this a little earlier, that those marches didn't come from nothing. You know, there was a lot of buildup. Montgomery was a town that brought Jim Crow into play before any other city in the United States. Montgomery was a town that had, because there were colleges and schools for blacks, they were able to create a community, like a 4-block radius in Montgomery, that was all black and pretty much run by black. So, you know, there was a lot of activity, and the drugstore across the street, Dean's, that we talk about, was one of the dropping off points for the bus boycott. And the owner's daughter was like a big part of the bus boycott. So, you know, you can probably make connections, but you can't make a direct connection.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, there's so much history that happened in this city. When you think about Montgomery, you know, in 1940 Montgomery, it's sort of like, you know, World War I is over, World War II is about to start. The boll weevil blight comes, you know, industrialization's coming into play. You know, it's just like things are just changing, you know, on a couple of year basis. We go from WPA style art to abstract expressionism. I mean, it's, you know, even an artist like Charles Shannon, when he comes back from the war, the kind of art that he was doing beforehand wasn't in vogue anymore. So somebody like him who potentially had a very promising career comes back from the war, and there's no interest in what he actually is doing.
I have a question for Jeffrey.
Yeah.
So that period in time that you document where there's the New South movement and the
Right.
1 month exhibit, was it an interracial movement? Were there other Black artists working with white artists, or was Bill the outlier?
It's a very good question. The New South only existed for 1 year, which is kind of an amazing thing in its own right, because they all fought amongst themselves and couldn't agree
That's
on
a
what
great
they were
sentence.
doing.
The New South lasted for a year.
And they were, they took a lot of heat. They were called communists. There was a lot of activity, but it was not racially diverse. They even found Bill because they were coming into that area to buy race records, or Lavelle kind of worked in the Five and Dime and Crest, and that's how he would give Traylor paint. But specifically, Shannon literally was coming there to buy records, because that was the thing that was the thing at the time. Jukeboxes and all that was a big deal. And there were two, and jukeboxes, because there were two kinds of music, because there was an upper class African-American community as well that existed there. So there were two kinds of music. There was like the juke joint music, and then there was like the Ink Spots, which is a more kind of upscale group for the time.
Thank you.
I have a question for you, Jeffrey, because
Sure.
when you talk about Conjure,
Thought of another question, if I may.
Uh,
The tap dancer was beautiful. When did you arrive at using the tap dancer to personify the
work.
figures? Yeah.
Right. So the reason that we have dancing, the blues, jazz, poetry, is that we tried to take all the things that we thought best were some of the biggest things that came out of Black culture. And because we felt that the work, that's where all the work was coming from. So specifically, he was working across the street from a movie theater. So a lot of the films, that would come through, he would actually use, like there's a piece that has a Sherlock Holmes image in it. There's a piece that has a dinosaur image in it. There's, other kinds of relationships like that. So the first idea was to use like Bill Robinson and Snake Hips. Those were real dancers who were in Hollywood films. And so when it got too costly to buy the rights to all those things, I brought in a dancer, and he and I went over all the different steps and all the different poses in the rehearsal studio. And then he went on stage and did them. And he danced his butt off. I'll tell you, he danced for 6 hours because we had to shoot it from all different angles. He was great. He was actually the understudy for Savion Glover in Bring On the Noise and Bring On the Noise, Bring On the Funk, I think it was called. So he's been doing this a long time.
That was great. I love that.
Thank you.
How did you get the film financed, and what was the cost?
So it came from a lot of different things. Part of the reason it took so long is that I would raise money as I needed it to do certain shoots. So everything from Kickstarter to the NEH to fundraising to friends, to personal money, like we just kept throwing things at it. And having worked in the business, I was able to get a lot of favors. So, I was able to save some money in that way. Like I'd given business to a lot of the venues beforehand. So they were happy to help out. The
So,
good thing is everybody got paid though. Go ahead.
so I had a question concerning your comment concerning The Conjurer. And it's so well, it kind of like fits into what I'm going to start talking about, which is in Bill Traylor's, some of his artwork is the blue. And it stands out in a lot of the certain aspects of it. And I know I understand, especially from the South. My grandmother's from Georgia, from the South. She was there in the 1800s, you know, working cotton, plantation fields. She's done all of that. And I know that with the blue, it's always about what they call a haint. It's like keeping the haint out, you know, the spirit or whatever you want to call it. I mean, my grandmother had this old fashioned thing where she would say, if you want to keep evil out or keep people out that you don't want in your house, you take a broom and you sweep after them through the house, and then you turn the broom upside down and leave it on the porch. So, you know, that was, you know, from the South where she grew up. That was one of their things. But I noticed in Bill's painting, he has all this light blue, this really bright blue. And I know down south, there are houses that have these roofs and doors and windows of those same colors. And from what I understand, it was done supposedly in an old fashioned, and I want you to let me know yes or no, but I assume it was done as a ward to keep out certain spirits, haints, whatever.
Right. Well, you just answered your own question really well, Bea. I mean, in the sense that you gave a lot of the reasons. I mean, but there are, what's fascinating is he was given a lot of different color paints. Somehow, you know, that blue stuck with him. But there are so many cultural references to blue. As Radcliffe Bailey talks about the Yoruba culture and even like the blues. I mean, you know, you can't get more direct than that. And so I think that's when I found that Willie King song that explained the blues, and then took his drawings and kind of placed them up against there. You know, I mean, it tells a story. I mean, it's not just blue. It's you know, sadness, it's happiness, it's all these different, you know, it's superstition, it's you know, I also think, you know, I don't talk about this that much, but I also think during that time there's a lot of conflict of religion that people are fighting, the religion that may be what they're being brought up in, but there's also the spiritual religions that are going on. So, you know, there's a lot that you want to protect yourself against. So I would say, you know, blue seems to have been a part of that for him.
Jeffrey, you did a remarkable job of telling history. I mean, not just Traylor's history and the way the images tell that story, but the whole history. I mean, the artwork and the history can't be separated. And I thought you did a remarkable job of explaining this artist's history and how, you know, where maybe these images came from. And then part of that is the family. And it's remarkable. I thought it was remarkable that so many people, a couple generations later, how proud they were to be related to him. And yet earlier in the film, it seemed like his family had just dispersed, and I couldn't see how he would ever find them again. I mean, we didn't have cell phones, even telephones. Your telephone number would change every time you moved. So, you know, you had to write letters. I just don't even, and you know, if you don't have an address, how do you stay in touch? And
you bring up a lot of points, which I'll try to address. Well, first of all, you know, a big part of this in 1992 and 93, they had a family reunion because one member of the family was feeling like the kind of desperate feel that you're describing. And they did an incredible amount of research and work. In fact, the women who were there showing the trailer work, the white women, were procured or like asked to come because they knew that Bill Traylor was part of the family, but they knew so little about them. So they went looking for those women to come and give a story and a history of what was going on. But I want to talk about like a bigger thing, and that I think the film tries to do is that it talks about a man in full. You know, we don't get to sort of tell the whole story of somebody like a Bill Traylor, the good, the bad, the sassy, the womanizer, all the different parts of him that add up to make a person, and I think, there's this phrase called there's a word called absence, and that word can be put in front of a lot of things. And one thing it can be put in front of is the absence of ruin and the absence of history. And that if you don't have a place that you can relate to, and if you grew up in Montgomery and Montgomery's been torn down, you can't reference that as part of your history. If you're an immigrant and you've been taken out of your country, you have an absence of that kind of experience. And I think that really speaks in some way to the African-American experience. I know it speaks, like I come from a Holocaust family, but I know it speaks to that family in its own way. But without that, and also, there's another phrase that Carrie Marshall uses called the vacuum of images, where people didn't have photographs, they didn't save photographs. So it's very hard to build your family history into something that can be carried on from generation to generation. Like looking in your grandfather's blanket chest or looking in the medicine closet and seeing what's in there. And I think, and also, Bill Traylor and many artists like him are examples of, people who were poor and indigent, and they were left out of the history. The documentation wasn't very good. And so even in 20th century art, they were left out. And I think all of the things that are happening today are opportunities for, for us to look at this, not just on an art level, but on a social level, and be able to, make the tent bigger. So
I think
I don't know if
you
that
do that
answered your
really.
question.
Yeah, no, I think this film, you've done that really well in this film. It's really exciting to
Thank you.
see this history that I knew so little, about, even on a very personal level. Even though, yeah, as you say, we don't really know, all these parts of his life are missing, but you did create something that I think is
Right.
true.
Well, interesting too, Matt. I would say I've talked to African American friends and white friends, and the history wasn't taught very well. I mean, we were given the banners. We know we know phrases, but we don't really know what those things mean or what the ramifications of those things were. We're a very young country, and these things weren't that long ago. And I think that we have I think that the work, Bill Traylor's work, turns out to be kind of contemporary, and maybe will continue to be contemporary for a while, in the sense of what the message is.
We showed,
in terms of Montgomery and other people who have affected American life from Montgomery. Of course, Martin Luther King wasn't from Montgomery, but he showed up there as like a minister in his mid-20s. You mentioned that there's a film coming out.
There was. It's out this year. I think it just played theatrically. You probably can rent it. It's called MLK FBI.
Okay.
Sam Pollard.
All right, I gotta see it.
Yeah, it's very good.
Thank you. There's an interesting, just for Nyackers, there's an interesting connection between Martin Luther King and Nyack. Right after the bus boycott, well, actually during the bus boycott, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which was headquartered in Nyack, sent down organizers. One of them was Baird Rustin, and they supported the effort. And then immediately when it was over, they realized the importance of that action, and they wanted to spread it around the world. So they got Al Cap to do a comic, and this is one of the versions of it, and it's been translated into a couple languages. There's a Farsi one. There's a
Look
Spanish version. And,
you're a library over there. I love it.
Well, there's a lot of history, like you said, and it's history that's not. So this is aimed for a generation that really doesn't understand. I mean, yeah, that boycott. You're right. Only very few cities in America could have done a boycott that was 381 days with people risking their life every day, losing their jobs, and really putting everything. They're going all in for that period of time, and they won. I mean, that's the incredible thing. Not only was it incredibly difficult, but it was a total victory. They broke the back of Jim Crow. They broke the back of segregation. They broke the back of a bus company. So that was the beautiful thing about your film, Jeffrey. You could see, because at the end, one of his relatives said he was an incredibly strong man. He had to be. And to survive all that loss and to survive the amputation. And then at one point, there's a person who thinks they've said goodbye to him on a deathbed and lives another 2 years. And so it's an incredibly resilient community that you've been able to provide this incredible document for. So I really
did you play the movie Mudbound at your theater? Do you remember it? About 2 years ago, there was a film called Mudbound. It was kind of in the Academy Award,
Right.
But it was 1940 Alabama,
Right.
which was one of the first times I had actually seen Alabama try an attempt to depict that time period. And one thing I hope it was clear in the movie is that these plantations weren't what it wasn't Tara, they weren't factory plantations. These were plantations that maybe had 10, 12, 8 slaves on it. They were literally farms, very small farms where there wasn't a ton of money. It was a very small world, and Bill Traylor lived in pretty much a 40-mile radius his entire life. And so when he would go up north, he always ended up coming back because that 40 miles is what he knew. And, again, to answer part of your question, is one of the liberties I took is that everything that happens in the film actually happened. I don't know for sure if he saw it, but because his purview was so immediate, being in that range, I figure he may have at least heard about it. So, so factually, we were able to build a world there that, takes us 100 years in time. So it's kind of a rare.
I think his pictures is something like in a legacy. Considering that, me, I can tell you right now, I've been doing research on my family ancestry, trying to find relatives and ancestors and things like that. And I remember the stories my grandmother told me about being down south in Macon, Georgia, working on a plantation, and she's only 5 years old. Mm-hmm. And she has no shoes, and she said it was horrible and then when she got older, she always talked about how bad her feet were because of it. Mm-hmm. So for me, being a child of the 70s, it was like, I've never really dealt with that, and then to have that in front of you, that makes a big deal. So now here I am trying to fill in those pages of that legacy, but with Bill's, at least with his artwork, he has some of that fills it in. It doesn't have the exact people's faces of who he met or what he did, but it gives a story to his family, his children and grandchildren and whatever, about where he was, what he did, what kind of man he was, those kind of things that a lot of us as African Americans don't have, So right. I think it was a great film that you really did.
Well, thanks. I mean, that's what that's what the intention was to try to get there. So
What kind of pickup have you had on the film? Is
Well, the
is
film is
anybody
being
distributing it, or has it?
yeah, it's actually beside your theater there in Nyack. It's playing virtually in 75 theaters around the country right now.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
It opened theatrically, even in spite of COVID. It opened at the Film Forum in New York and played for 3 weeks.
Mm.
And a theater in LA called the Lemley, which is kind of the Film Forum of Los Angeles.
Mhm.
And we've been doing a lot of what I've been loving. Bea, you'll appreciate this. Several of the private schools in New York who are trying to do diversity training in their schools have rented the film for the whole school, parents and
Wow.
faculty.
Mhm.
And then we've done Zoom sessions. Radcliffe Bailey did one with me. Sam Pollard's going to do one at St. Anne's School in a week or two. So those have been very, very enriching to kind of get that word out there.
And that is one of the best things you can do as an educator, as someone who grew up in an African American community in the 60s and were not privy to African American history. We were only allowed, our teacher, who was an African American man named Mr. Jones, and I remember this, could only teach what he had to teach, which was about the American Revolution and things like that. He could not talk about Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, things like that. In order to teach us, he had to pull down the shade, lock the door, and then pull out the real history.
Right. Where was this? Where were you in school?
I went to school in Brooklyn, Brownsville in 1960. It was 1962, 63. And I remember so vividly, I was in 5th grade, and how he would teach he was the history teacher. But I remember him always pulling down the shade and locking the door and then saying, okay, now we're going to read about this.
That sounds like a scene in a movie.
Yeah, exactly. It does sound like it, but it really happened. And I have to thank him for it, because I never did get any of that history as I went through the rest of the other grades growing up in the 60s and 70s. Now it's a loss, so thank you, because of you and the film that you have.
Well, I had a lot of collaborators. I have to say that it was a team of people that made this happen, and from all different walks of life. But it was challenging, but a lot of fun in the end, I have to say.
What's next?
I'm actually there's another artist that I've always wanted to do a film about, and I started it and I put it down to do this film, and I'm going to go back to it. His name is Martin Ramirez. It's not the same story, but I'll tell you briefly. It's a story of a Mexican immigrant who comes to the United States to make money in the 20s, works on the railroad, gets caught up in the Depression. And all his friends go back to Mexico in kind of a forced evacuation. He stays, gets caught in a town in Sacramento, and picked up by the police for being not being able to communicate, and thrown in a mental institution, and where he spent the rest of his life. And while he was in the institution, he did these amazing drawings. And if you Google him, you'll see. I mean, they're in the like Traylor, they're in the Museum of Modern Art and all the other big museums in the country. But it's a story of immigration, the mental health system in our country, and art. So
that's another one, yeah.
Yeah,
your film, Police Brutality, played into Bill Traylor's life
yes,
as
it did.
when he lost his
Quietly.
son.
Yeah. Well, the son, and also, there's that one drawing. I don't use. There's a famous photograph with the hoses where a dog is up on top of it. Which there's a drawing that's almost the exact image, and I decided to leave it by itself and not show the photograph with it, because I thought it had more power. But he definitely was paying attention to that, though, Bill, I think. You know, also sports figures. I mean, there's Jesse Owens, you know, Joe Louis. You know, a lot of African-American artists of that time period were doing those famous people too, you know, and we talked earlier a little bit about cats and dogs and, you know, and farm animals. You know, we pretty much think that he knew a lot of those animals, like the cats particularly seem to be a cat that he's repeating from a different point of view. So it's not all, you know, strum and drang. It's some of it is just things that are happening on the street in front of him as well. So
reportage.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions out there?
Just a comment about blue. In researching my Macaulay family history, I spent a lot of time around Chapel Hill. And that's where both Rosa and my forebears came from. And the University of North Carolina is very proud of their blue. And if you walk around Chapel Hill, the street signs, everything's blue, the particular blue of the University of North Carolina. And they very proudly trumpet that as the real blue, as opposed to that snooty private school up the road, Duke, who has a little different kind of blue.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that connects with Bill Traylor, but just the power, it's almost there's some super power of blue around that part of North Carolina.
Yeah. Well, then there's navy blue as well, you know. I don't have a good answer for that, but I'm very familiar with the UNC blue because a good friend of mine's daughter just graduated this weekend, and my social media page is filled with pictures
yeah,
of the blue. Yeah, that's an interesting blue because that's almost like a robin blue, isn't it? Like it's.
Well, they around Chapel Hill, they say this is the true color of the North Carolina sky or the Carolina sky. And Duke, of course, has bastardized it.
Isn't there an expression like a bluebird sky? Is that the color that it is, like a bluebird?
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
So any more questions, anybody?
All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey and Bill, for both being here. I mean, it's great. The whole conversation was great, everything. I really loved it, and thank you very much.
Thank you. You're a good moderator, Bea. That was very good.
Yeah.
I was hoping I wasn't the moderator, but just somebody who's here.
No, I know.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Okay. Do you have any information that you can, like, let us know and, so we can keep in contact and to know when you're coming out with other stuff?
Right. If you go to Bill Traylor Chasing Ghosts, there's a lot of .com. There's a lot. I'm all over social media on Instagram. My handle on Instagram is, as I learned in the South, that it's more complicated than it looks. And there is a Facebook page. So, I mean, it's all out there. You can find it. But BillTraylorChasingGhosts.com is the best place to go. And that's also, there's a Gmail account attached to that as well. So
okay.
Keep in touch.
Yes, great definitely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Rivertown. Another great night, Rivertown. Let's try to get Mudbound, Matthew.
Yeah.
Look into it. It's a good film. I saw it. It's great.
Yeah.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Take care.
Bye,